Billy Napier did have his Monday press conference today, of course, after LSU. Ole Miss coming up so he's going to start looking forward, but he wants to see some maturity from his team.
Obviously, a good Ole Miss team coming into town, and a lot at stake. So the big thing for us is we have to earn the right to win, and I think that's got to be the approach each day of the week. I thought we wanted to be the most prepared we have been to play last week. That was the big message and challenge, and I think we were. So this week it's all about earning the right to win, and we have to have a little bit of a playoff mindset ourselves to some degree. Can we handle, the praise, the positive? Obviously played well Saturday and get a lot of gratification from that. But I think it's important that we hit the reset button here, and it's about the next challenge. You're either growing or you're dying. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. So our attitude and our approach towards meetings and practice and our self-discipline, our routine this week will be really critical. I would like to see some maturity from our team. Can we handle – this group has been able to ignore the noise. Can we sort through the hype a little bit, and stay consistent in the way we prepare, our practice habits, our self-discipline, our film review? Because then I think long-term as a program to go where we want to go, we're going to have to navigate that week in and week out, right? So this league in a playoff format will challenge that, so not only physically turning it around and being ready to play, but mentally, new set of variables, new personnel, new plan, and then emotionally you got to sort through that too, right? So are we mature enough to handle all the praise, and can we turn it around and do it again?
Yeah, hasn't been much praise for the Gators this year. And, of course, now coming off the biggest win this season, a lot of people want to say this was the biggest win in Napier's career. Utah game one, still the bigger one to me, given what that team ended up being. But you can see it where it probably is Billy Napier's biggest win in a lot of ways, just because of finally getting that vote of confidence, but still so many questions. And look, one win doesn't fix all the issues, and it's automatically – everything's A-okay right now. Moving forward to Ole Miss, they want to win. We want to win as fans, but look, Ole Miss is a pretty darn good team. If Florida goes out there and loses Saturday, it doesn't mean Florida hasn't matured. It doesn't mean Florida can't build on momentum. I mean, look, LSU's a really good team. It's going to be hard to walk out of the swamp with a victory, but it's also a little bit different. This week, you're getting some praise, but I don't think many people are going to be giving Florida the same chance against Ole Miss as there were people giving Florida a lot of credit to do something against LSU last week. So it's a little bit different this week. You are early in the week. I was listening to different podcasts and SEC Network Radio, listening and watching Chris Doering, troll Peter Burns all day, making him dress up as a Gator band member for the first time that he's been able to have Peter Burns kind of look ridiculous on TV for picking LSU and their bet that they have every year. So Florida's getting a lot of praise sung early this week, but I think it's only going to last a little bit, Will, because Ole Miss is coming up, and I think when you start looking at it, okay, yeah, this one's going to be tough. But to me, it's not going to mean if Florida walks, you don't want to go lose 40-10. But if Florida goes out there, and look, this isn't moral victory time, but if Florida goes out there and fights hard, the word maturity, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, well, they couldn't live up to the hype. The reason they lost this game was because they won last week and they weren't ready to play this week. Ole Miss just might be better than Florida, and that's really all it's going to mean.
Not might be. Is so they're second overall in yards per play gained on offense. They're fifth overall in yards per play allowed on defense. You look at EPA differential so offense minus defense subtraction. They're the best team in the SEC, even though they've had 2 losses. Now, look, they did lose to this LSU team. They did also lose to a Kentucky team. I think when we talk about keeping momentum, it's a good thing Florida's not playing Kentucky. The last 2 times Florida's had real momentum. After the win against Utah, they went out and laid an egg against Kentucky the next week. And after the win against Tennessee last year, they had a sort of lackluster performance against Charlotte, and then went out and laid an egg against Kentucky the week after. So maybe it's a good thing that we're not playing the Wildcats this week. But look, this is an enormous challenge for Billy Napier. It's an enormous challenge for the team. I will say that I do think this win is the biggest win in Billy Napier's tenure at Florida. And the reason why is Florida whipped them. Florida averaged 7.9 yards per play. LSU averaged 4.3. Third down conversions, for the most part, are a mirage. Now, some of it is what Florida was doing on defense. They were dropping a little bit deeper in their zones than I'd like to see. But that was clearly the game plan. The game plan was make LSU dink and dunk down the field, and we think they're going to make mistakes, and we're going to protect against the big plays. And if we do that, we'll be okay. Now, there were a few times where probably they should have gotten off the field, would have changed the time of possession a little bit more. And to be honest, if they'd gotten 3 more possessions for DJ Lagway in the offense, I think they would have scored 38, 39 points. That's why I think it's such a big deal, because we've been talking, like, Anthony Richardson in year 1 against Utah looked awesome, but he was never the long-term answer at quarterback. And we knew that because we knew he was either going to the NFL after year 1 or potentially year 2. The win against Tennessee last year was nice, but again, even the people who were the Mertz supporters, and I was not one of them, was someone, there was a recognition that Mertz was not bringing Florida to a championship level. I think what we saw the other day is that DJ Lagway has the opportunity to raise Florida's floor to, like, I mean, we're talking like 8-9 wins as like the baseline expectation, with an opportunity with the right moves and the right personnel and a few things going Florida's way to be competing for a playoff berth. And so to me, like, establishing that Lagway, while injured, he didn't even really play that well. Like, he still played great, but he didn't play well for DJ Lagway. Like, he was way better against Kentucky than he was the other day against LSU. There were some throws that he left out there, but you can see him starting. And I think I even texted you during the game, Dave, you can see him starting to figure out what to do when the defense doesn't give him a simple look pre-snap that he can exploit. But the minute LSU gave him man-to-man coverage, bam. Like, he knows where to go with the ball the minute you give him man-to-man coverage and you decide to blitz. He's almost unblitzable at this point, because you're going to give the risk of giving up a 40-yard gain is probably worth more than the reward of getting him into the ground. I think you're going to see teams like Ole Miss and teams like even Florida State play a ton of zone to just keep him keep him in front of them from here on out. The
game-winning drive, 3 plays, but the middle play was the pass to Hansen. And, we had talked about tight ends last week and having to get him involved. LSU brings a ton of pressure. Simple. Boom. There you go.
I'll tell you, the most impressive play in all of it, and I still haven't posted my post-game recap because I've been sleeping and recovering from the travel, but the most impressive play for me in the entire game was LSU showed a single high look and they rotated into a 2 high look with zone underneath, and he saw it and he checked it down to Jacoby Jackson, who then ran to the 17, and they happened to have a holding penalty on the play. But that shows a progression that DJ Lagway was not doing against A&M, was not doing against Miami, and quite honestly wasn't even really doing against Kentucky. It's just Kentucky is stupid and played cover 3 the entire game, and he just drilled seams down. He drilled the seam route like over and over and over and over again against him. LSU was trying to do some stuff post-snap, and you can see him processing it. That ball to Jackson still got out a little bit late, and so, that's going to start to speed up as he goes. So I look at this and I go, this is probably an injured DJ Lagway while still learning how to process when defenses are doing stuff post-snap, is still a guy with a QB rating of like 145, and my stat yards above replacement is 0.98. So we're talking like Jake Fromm is kind of where that sits. That's like the floor of the kid. Because I honestly didn't think he played that well. Some of that is expectations. Because when he throws a dime right down the sideline, you're like, that's just what he does. But still,
and go through this comment from a YouTube comment in here. Will Miles' impression: Gators win, but if LSU catches those interceptions, we're having a different conversation.
I have such a reputation. I really do.
But Jason Yulee does say, giving you a hard time. Go Gators. And you're the star here. The real Army Sniper also says, anyone else patiently waiting for Will's take of the LSU game and the outlook for?
Well, I was just boring everybody. They were waiting for the real show here.
I don't know. You were there, Dave. Like, what did you think about? Every time Lagway threw the ball to the outside, I was like, completion. Like he missed one to Badger. I think it was like late in the third quarter. And Badger kind of tripped on his own feet as he was going back that direction. And he missed one to DK where the DB actually grabbed DK's arm and wouldn't let it go. And it should have been a pass interference call.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of felt like, and I'm sorry to jump in real quick, but I kind of felt like watching it. DJ was sailing some early too. I mean, it looked like kind of the hamstring issue. Potentially, he was even trying to get used to the feel of things in there. And so, I ultimately, DJ has an ability to see the field at this point that it's hard for a true freshman even think about true freshmen that have had that ability to do that. And so, I mean, ultimately, it seems like if we get a Lagway that looks like this, even moving forward, where maybe he didn't play the best like you're saying, Will, but he has the ability to continue to mature and continue to grow into next week and see defenses begin to see things slow down. You could get an even more explosive as that hamstring gets better, and even more explosive DJ Lagway that could maybe do some things even against an Ole Miss.
There were probably 4 or 5 plays where he handed the ball off to his running back, and he had the back end wide open. And there was one I can't remember. I think it was in the second half you could see him. He turned towards me and my son because we were in the end zone, and you could just see him going, "Damn it! I wish I could keep the ball," because he just saw this giant opening on the backside. He knows he's not allowed to do it, and he knows it's bad for him to do it. But like the competitor in him has him doing it. Now, I will say,
but it does make you wonder too, would it even be there if it went for his hamstring injury? Maybe LSU was just like, you know what, screw it. If you do just happen to keep it this one time, we'll give it to you.
But that then opens up the running game and lost. There was a lot of talk. I saw a lot of chatter on Twitter during the game about Florida not running the ball very much. But the reality is they had a 20-yard run by Jacoby Jackson on the first drive. They had the 55-yard run to Baugh. Other than that, they had 15 rushes for – what is that, like 35 yards? So on the other 15, they weren't going anywhere, right? So they popped a couple, but holding that guy on the edge, on the backside, really helps your running game. And we've even seen this, like statistically, when Mertz has been in there, Florida's running game has been much less effective than when Lagway's been in there because he's able to hold them. Now, all that being said, Dave, because it's me, I still, our listener did mention the 2 potential interceptions that Lagway threw. The first one was egregious. That one absolutely should have been picked. The other thing, and this has been a hallmark of Billy Napier coach teams, the DK fumble on the punt return could have been absolutely disastrous because 3 plays later, Florida scoring a touchdown. You had, after the first drive of the game where they get the 4th down stop, they're in LSU territory, 3 plays, -7 yards. They have a holding penalty and a false start. After the Banks fumble recovery, they're at the LSU 34. They have a false start, incomplete, loss of 3, incomplete, and they have to punt. So, like, there are definitive signs that this team has the ability to do more. I still, though, look at it and say Lagway's explosives, at some point, the inconsistency will catch up to him. Now, I think a year or 2 from now, that inconsistency starts to go away, and those incompletions are completions. You don't get the delays of game, those sorts of things. But this is the thing that concerns me the most about all of this stuff, is that DJ Lagway is essentially outplaying the mistakes that Graham Mertz and Aiden Warner could not outplay. And I would like to see those mistakes get buttoned up. Like, overall, like if you talked about off-season progression and what we want to see, like that to me, because you're not beating Ole Miss, giving up 2 scoring opportunities in Ole Miss territory with no points and punting it back to Jackson Dart. You're not beating Ole Miss, giving up, 3rd and 18 on a draw right up the middle, deep in their own territory, turns into a first down. Like, because Dart's going to hit some of those deep shots. Dart's going to hit some of those explosive plays. And that's the challenge. I mean, the challenge is I think Florida played really, really well against LSU, but I don't think really, really well is going to get the job done against Ole Miss. I think they have to be flawless. And I have yet to see a Billy Napier team be flawless in any game for 4 quarters in 3 years. The closest you could say is the first half against Tennessee last year. That's it. Yep. And in the second half, it wasn't flawless. And you might be able to say the same thing about Central Florida this year in the first half. And in the second half, it wasn't flawless. They need 4 quarters of absolutely flawless play. You can't be getting false starts on your home field. Like, you just can't. You can't have illegal formation. You can't have all that sort of stuff. So those are the things. Anyway.
And Dave, that's where I was going to go with you. To me, that's what maturity looks like. When Billy Napier talks about maturity, that's what it looks like. When you got the opportunity, don't step on your own foot. Don't throw a pick or don't throw a ball that might be picked and ruin a drive. That, to me, that's what the maturity looks like. You do those things, you'll go play a good game versus Ole Miss. You probably still lose anyway, but you give yourself a chance. Don't step on your own foot and not give yourself a chance. That's what maturity looks like to me against Ole Miss. And then in 2 weeks, maturity looks like going out there and beating Florida State 50-9.
I think that's what everybody wants to see, right? Is a well-coached football team that shows up, that knows their assignments, that knows what they're supposed to do, and executes, right? And so we've heard a lot of the head football coach talking about how you need to execute better. But there's a certain point where you either need to execute in big situations or you don't. And so, this is another one of those big situations where we have a home crowd that, even though it's a noon game, hopefully it'll be pretty raucous and ready to go, and folks will get there a little earlier and get going at your tailgate a little bit earlier, and we'll see some real success. But I'll tell you, I think DJ's great, has played well. Man, the defense has been just the thing. Watching them, it's what's been missing from this whole tenure for Billy Napier. Was guys that are running around and hitting hard. And it's the culture, it's the mentality. And I think that's maybe I'm beating you to the punch here, but that's the thing that was watching that game at LSU that you sat there and you were like, okay, this is Florida football. This is the Florida football we've been missing. Yeah.
And I wonder, not to try and criticize here, what performance are we going to get? 2 games ago against Texas, we couldn't get to the quarterback to save our lives. And then this game against one of the best offensive linemen in the country, one of the best offensive line groups in the country, who'd given up 6 sacks all year, Florida gets 7 in this game. So 2 games ago, you couldn't get anything. A game ago, you got everything you could have asked for from a defensive front. So, a little more consistency. I think that's what look, going against LSU, good luck getting 7 sacks again this week versus LSU. But it does give you a little bit of inclination that, hey, this is what you are capable of. As we go and try to finish this season out on a high point, let's get a little bit more consistency and see if we can see just a bit of what we saw Saturday night against, in the second half versus LSU.
Well, I mean, look, Florida's defense is still 72nd overall in the country in terms of yards per play allowed. So while I'm impressed with the performance against LSU, I'm not ready to say that they're fully loaded to come and take on this Ole Miss team. We'll see what they can do. Against guys like Cam Ward, they've struggled. Against guys like Brock Vandegrift, they've played very well. And we talked about it coming into this game. Garrett Nussmeier had really struggled over the last 4 or 5 games. Basically had a QB rating of around 110. And what was he against Florida? 110.9. So Florida held Nussmeier to almost exactly what he had been doing over the last 4 or 5 games, which, hey, that's still a major improvement given that Florida's made guys who've looked sort of poor look like Heisman contenders throughout the last 3, 4, 5 years. However, I think there's a huge upgrade from Garrett Nussmeier to Jackson Dart. And one of the reasons I actually picked Florida in the LSU game is I looked at it and I said, I think Lagway's special, and I think Lagway is a major, major upside over Nussmeier. I can't say that about the Ole Miss game. I think Lagway may play great, but I don't think he's like if you asked me for this one game, do I want DJ Lagway or Jackson Dart? It's not a quick, oh yeah, I want DJ Lagway. I mean, I might choose him when doing the full evaluation, but it's not something where it's a no-brainer. Whereas Nussmeier versus Lagway, it's a no-brainer. I think you go back to the Texas game, Quinn Ewers, okay, he struggled a little bit this year, but that's a guy who led the team to the playoff last year. Like that's a full-throated SEC quality quarterback, and he tore up Florida's defense. Carson Beck, same thing. Even struggled in the first half, but without the turnovers, Florida was giving up a lot of yardage to Georgia, and eventually in the second half, the defense sort of broke. Nussmeier wasn't good enough to make the Florida defense break, at least not in the way some of those other guys did. And so that's the challenge to me if I'm Billy Napier, if I'm Ron Roberts, if I'm Austin Armstrong is, okay, we didn't break against a lesser quarterback, but now we have to show that we're not going to break against a superior quarterback, and we'll see if they're able to do it. I have my doubts, but that is the next step. I mean, the next step is you got to show that you can do it against a team that has, I mean, look, Ole Miss, I don't think has more talent on the lines overall than Florida does. I think you could argue they've been better coached, and I think you can argue that the quarterback has more has more experience. But I think overall, you go position by position, there's nobody from a recruiting ranking perspective who's that much better than Florida's guys. So this to me is completely, have the guys built up enough confidence to be able to be aggressive and go after this? And then, are they going to get some turnovers? Because I think they're going to have to turn over Dart the same way they did Beck. And if they can't get that to happen, then it's going to be a long day.
Yeah, looking forward to it. Like I said, noon in the Swamp. Last home game of the year. Man, it's flies by.
Well, let me ask you this: what do you see a weakness that Ole Miss has at this point? It seems like their offensive line has struggled at times this year to protect Dart. And, he's had some injuries and now got that ankle. Is it their offensive line that's a little bit suspect that maybe can be taken advantage of here?
I mean, I think so. I haven't done my deep dive when it comes to Ole Miss yet. I think any team that loses to Kentucky and any team that loses to this LSU team certainly can be had. And I think that's kind of the lesson of the SEC this year, is that there's nobody who's just like absolutely fantastic. And again, LSU kept Dart to a QB rating of 117. Kentucky had him at 160. But you look at everything else, he's like 272, 222, 183, 210, 140 against South Carolina, which was a reasonably close game. But then 171 against Arkansas, or against Oklahoma, 284 against Arkansas, and then 141 against Georgia. So the answer
what was his QB rating against South Carolina? They beat the crap out of South Carolina. His QB rating was that low?
South Carolina game, it was 141, which
they got an early lead on that.
Yeah. They got a big lead.
Like a punt. Yeah, there was a fake punt, and they ended up getting the ball.
So I would have to go back and look at his rushing numbers in those games. I bet you that if you look at the rushing numbers, there you go. Kentucky 13 for 22, and LSU 15 for 27. He's getting sacked, he's getting flushed, and he's running the ball. So yes, to your point, Dave, I think absolutely the offensive line is going to be the determining factor. We'll see. I mean, it was interesting. You look at PFF, and Banks was not the best player on Florida from a play-to-play perspective. But when it came time to make a big play against LSU, Banks was the best player on the field. And so that to me is we've talked about this all year, is that the problem with Florida's defense over the past 3 years is there hasn't been anybody who can win a one-on-one matchup. And Caleb Banks won a bunch of one-on-one matchups on third down. He caused a second down fumble on Nussmeier that pinned him deep. He obviously, tracks down the offensive lineman for LSU after the fumble for Nussmeier, causes him to fumble and picks up the ball. But just he was flushing Nussmeier forward into guys like George Gums, into guys like TJ Searcy pretty much the entire night.
When's the last time we had an interior pressure like that? Like you and I, Will, we talked about the defense last week, and it was Zuniga and Grenard and Ja'Kai Polite, and you start looking at defensive ends. I can't remember the last time we've had interior pressure like that over all night long.
Consistently, Sharif Floyd.
Yeah, it has to be that long. Yeah.
You mean easily?
Yeah.
I mean, God, I'm not sure I had any kids when Sharif Floyd was playing there.
Now,
16 years, maybe.
Bernie Waters brings up Jervon Dexter, but what I'm saying is not a game like this.
No, Dexter was not a consistent just disruptor in the middle. We always kind of hoped he would be, and he would be okay from time to time, certainly flashed. But, I think you said the same thing about Banks. Like, it hasn't been this way the entire year, right? It's just this one game. He was a monster. But it is sort of a – so we talk about Lagway and the big plays, right? And Lagway's inconsistent in short and intermediate routes. There's no other way to say it. He's inconsistent on those. But when it comes time for a deep shot and he gets the opportunity to hit it, he hits it. And so I think from an interior lineman perspective, okay, if Banks gets pushed back a little bit and all of a sudden, it's a 3-yard gain instead of a tackle for loss, over time that starts to build up. But what I want to see from that guy is the explosive play on 3rd and 5, where all of a sudden Jackson Dart's getting flushed from the pocket and doesn't have an opportunity to set his feet, not because Florida's blitzing, but because Florida has collapsed the pocket because of the guy in the middle. And if you make enough explosive plays on defense at the defensive line, you can make the quarterback really uncomfortable, even if you're not explosive on a play-to-play basis. And I think that's kind of what you're seeing in the PFF rankings. Is there's a recognition that he played pretty well, but on a play-to-play basis, he wasn't a difference maker. But when it came time where Florida needed an explosive, needed something big, he was getting off the ball and he was driving the center and the guard back into the quarterback's face to a point where Nussmeier had to know where he was every time he took a snap. And that was the other thing we said last week, Dave, is who's the guy you game plan against?
Mm-hmm.
Who's the guy you go, where is that guy lining up? And the other day it was Banks, and Florida has not had a guy like that who you've had to game plan for or figure out what to do or chip or, make sure you've got a double team on him, which then frees up somebody else to come around the edge or frees up a linebacker to come through. We talked about, the Georgia game where they had Des Watson in the center taking up two guys and then the linebackers running off the edge of big Des and freeing them up that way. Well, now if you got to do that, if you bring Des and Banks in there and you got to double team both the guys on the inside, LJ McCray, TJ Searcy, George Gums all of a sudden have one-on-one matchups on the outside. So, I think
we saw Tyreek Sapp have a benefit of that.
Sapp played really well too. I mean, look, I think the defense overall played very, very well when it wasn't third down. And so there's some stuff to clean up there, especially with some of the drops that linebackers were taking. But the fact that Pup Howard wasn't in there, I do think has an impact in terms of where the linebackers were, and they'll clean some of that up, I think. But yeah, I mean, I think, Dave, that's going to be the question. And looking at those rushing numbers, really interesting that in the games where LSU struggled, Darts had 15 rushing attempts, which means they're putting him down in the backfield quite a bit. So interesting.